One of the most profound psychological dilemmas that exists is trying to understand the meaning of your life as a human being, as an individual. Another dilemma is the dilemma of the pursuit of happiness. Many a time, we struggle in trying to understand why we've been placed on this earth. In many cases, we pursue happiness unsuccessfully. And this calls for many questions. Why are human beings generally so unhappy? Or why do we continue to pursue happiness in futility? These are some of the things that trouble the human mind. It's an existential question. It's a question that I've asked myself time and time again. What is the purpose of my life, of living, if in the end it just all ends in death, where and which of which we know nothing of? Or well, there are some postulations of what comes after death, but in general, from where we are at this point in time, as living beings, as living sentient cognitive beings, we really know nothing of what happens after death. But I don't want to go into that. This question, or the pursuit of happiness, for instance, has led many people down rabbit holes, has led many people down very unsatisfactory journeys. It has led many people into bad unions because they continue to pursue happiness. I can't quite remember where I came across, and I suspect it is either in James Clear's book, The Power of Habit, or I'm not exactly sure, or it is in Nia Eyal's book, Indistractable. I'm not sure which of them. Where I'm sure James Clear talked about trying to fall in love with boredom when you want to make progress in life. But I think the message I'm trying to recall from one of those books, I can't remember the exact one. The message I'm trying to recall is the message that generally the natural state of human life is a state of discomfort, is a state of unhappiness, which means fundamentally your natural state as a human being, your default state, your baseline level is a state of suffering. In fact, we have that to achieve anything worthwhile, you have to go through a stage of sacrifice and devotion and commitment and constant giving to get, basically giving today for your future self to benefit tomorrow. So ultimately, even to achieve great things, there is a stage of sacrifice and giving and long suffering and persevering through the suffering. But bringing that back to the conversation of happiness, I think it was DMX in one of his songs, Sleeping, who said, the title of the song is Sleeping. Yes, if I remember correctly, yes, Sleeping, wherein he said, to live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering. And I think Jordan Peterson talks a lot about the concept of suffering and thriving in your suffering and carrying your suffering gracefully. But fundamentally, I think the main point, well, I use the word fundamentally quite a lot. The main point I'm trying to capture here, or the discussion I'm trying to provoke here, is why do we fail as individuals to realize that our default state is a state of suffering? Now, when I say suffering, many people link suffering to the concept of poverty or lack or material lack, as the case may be. Failing to realize that even people who are in relative affluence and have surplus do struggle and do suffer, because there are different kinds of suffering. There's suffering that comes from internal suffering, a state of a depressive state. There's suffering that comes from the workplace, pain, dissatisfaction. There's suffering that comes from family struggles. There's suffering that comes from, in fact, every day of your life, you will encounter something that will make you unhappy, that will try to steal your joy. Now, if you put this in perspective, this fundamentally tells you that, in fact, this is why there are many studies and many conversations about embracing gratitude as a way of hacking the default setting of suffering. But I think we miss the point when we fail to capture that on the baseline, life is a series of suffering and unhappy settings wherein we have moments of happiness here and there that make this suffering worth it. And I think it was Viktor E. Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning that I think he captured this most profoundly. And Viktor E. Frankl is a Holocaust survivor or was a Holocaust survivor. And I think he's famous for his work on something which he calls logotherapy, which is meaning, therapy through finding meaning. Now, in his concept, he says, Sigmund Freud, who's regarded as a father of psychoanalysis, talks about going back to childhood traumas to understand your behavior and your experiences and your worldview. His own perspective is moving beyond looking at the past and looking towards your current state and the future and finding meaning in the suffering. Because ultimately, the greatest unhappiness comes from being unable to find meaning in your life, or the endless pursuit of happiness which continues to evade you. Now, let's put this all in perspective. I think I've dropped on so many points without actually addressing them. Let's put this all in perspective. To live is to suffer. And if you do not understand that every day of your life, you will encounter some difficulty going to work, trying to make ends meet, trying to earn, trying to satisfy your family, trying to chase your dreams, trying to find your purpose in life, trying to meet targets. These are all different spheres of suffering. Going bankrupt or making a bad investment, having your children struggle at school or having your older ones pass on, having tragedy, basically encountering tragedy or difficulty. These are all facets of suffering. But the question is your suffering meaningful, right? Or is there a way to see meaning in the suffering that we have? I think Deepak Chopra also talks about this in his book, The 7 Secrets of Spiritual Success, where he talks about embracing the journey, but I think he talks about it in a different way. Embracing the journey and not fixating on the outcome. So in other words, recognizing that the process and the journey, the process of getting to a destination is actually the most important part, maybe even more important than the journey. Which, for instance, is why when people achieve what they've set out to achieve, they often move on almost immediately and begin to chase the next high, which means they then move from a place of satisfaction and achievement and begin to embrace suffering again or struggle again for a new goal. So, which means your default state is a state of dissatisfaction and suffering. And then if you refuse to pursue something, if you refuse to pursue anything, it could be love, it could be profession, it could be career, it could be finances, but so long as you pursue something, so long as you exist in this world, you suffer, right? And then the only time suffering stops is when you die. But the main thing is to understand that there is meaning in this suffering, and failure to find meaning in this suffering is what extends this suffering. And pursuing happiness for the sake of happiness is a futile endeavor. So Viktor E. Frankl puts this so profoundly in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. There, he describes, I'll just drop the quote the way he says it. He says, "For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue as the unintended side effect of a devotion," I'm paraphrasing here, "of a devotion towards somebody else or something else outside of self." So in other words, to be happy or to succeed, you should not pursue success for the sake of success or pursue happiness for the sake of happiness. But instead, you devote yourself towards maybe making somebody else happy or towards doing something greater than yourself. It is then that you succeed, or it is then that you find happiness. And I think it is quite profound, especially when you speak to parents who devote their lives to their children's welfare. And then along that journey, there are tumultuous times when you butt heads with your kids, or you butt heads with whoever is raising your kid with you, because you have variance of opinion about how things should go. But in the end, things come out well on the other side. So these are examples of how ultimately it is passing through the suffering that makes life meaningful. This is something I think is quite profound. And I think many people, more and more people, continue to have, I would say, even broken relationships, live very, very dissatisfied lives, because they seek for happiness in material things. They seek for happiness from people, as the case may be, failing to realize that happiness is not something that exists in perpetuity. Happiness is something that comes every now and then those moments of happiness, those bouts of happiness, short-lived as they are, make all the suffering in life meaningful. In the absence of this, if you continue to chase happiness like a high, it will continue to evade you. And so it's something that I think about every now and then when trying to figure out, well, what is the meaning of life, and then what is the purpose of life. And then again, I talk about, I'll go back to the concept of parenthood, because this is where I think it's most evident. So I often tell people, and I think I had a lengthy conversation with a friend about this not quite long ago. I often tell people that the only time that everything is free for you, and in this case, if you're lucky, because there are many people who don't even get this, the only time when you get a pass at life is from when you're born, under the custody and the stewardship of your parents or your guardians, to a point when you become an adult and you begin to fend for yourself. So this is your formative years, when you build your character, when you you get a foundation of who you are, and you begin to build your identity. This is the period when life is supposedly easy, and even then it's not easy, because you're taught to strive, you're taught to be ambitious, you're taught to dream, as the case may be, and you're taught to sacrifice towards your dreams. However, you have the umbrella of a parent or guardians who stand as a buffer between you and the real world, or the real challenges, or I would say, the dark sides of life, so to speak. But then when you grow into adulthood and you become a parent, and I like to use parenthood as an example, and you become a parent, your free trial is over, right? This means it is now your time to sacrifice, just as someone else has sacrificed for you. This is why sometimes people say, if you want to change the world, don't get married, or if you want to change the world, don't have kids. Do all these things before you have kids, because it is only then that you can live life for yourself, when you are on your own, when you're by yourself. But once you get into a committed endeavor with somebody else, in this case, raising a child is a commitment, right? Or staying together with someone in a union is commitment. So by this regard, I mean, once you cross to that threshold, then you must recognize that your free trial is over, and ultimately it is now your time to sacrifice for society and to suffer perpetually for somebody else's own growth and development. And this is the way evolution has said this thing, right? Because as humans, cognitive as we are, intelligent as we are, we don't simply live to exist for the basic needs of life, like or to satisfy our pure hedonic cravings, food, orgasm, and the rest. We search for deeper, more meaningful rewards in life, right? So this could be, like I said, the commitment towards somebody else. So it's something that every now and then it troubles me, and it worries me. I go to bed asking myself, well, what is the meaning of this life? And will I have lived a life worthy of recalling, so to speak? And sometimes I see people who, for lack of a better word, who take to, or for lack of a better way of saying is, well, I don't even like to talk about this topic, who take their lives, right? And it makes me question, like, well, as beautiful as life tends to be, even though it's full of hurdles and struggle and suffering, is it because sometimes we have not found a way to understand what life's baseline is? Or is it because we're chasing something that is non-existent? Or is it that they have found out that the baseline of life is suffering, and then they don't want to deal with that? So these are questions that sometimes pop in my head, because I sort of try to understand the motivation behind why people do the things that they do. These are all things that I struggle with. And then I imagine that it's a topic that is not talked about enough. Children grow into a world that is harsher than the sterilized environment of being a child, right? Or the sterilized, well, Not always the case. Some children go through severe hardship and pain and suffering. But for those who don't, right, when you come out from childhood and you begin to move into adolescence and independence towards adulthood, you begin to move out of the sterilized environment provided to you by your parents, right? So these are the things that I feel that not enough people don't have these conversations with their children as much as they should, or younger people as much as they should, to prepare them for life as it is. And then because we have, and I'm saying this because we increasingly have more and more people, more and more young people struggling with depression, living unhappy lives. And in fact, it's getting worse because we now have, statistically, we now have more and more people living alone. People don't connect as they used to, as much as they used to. Fundamentally, you have more and more people in isolation, without partners, living isolated lives. And it's heightened by, I would say, technology and how easily you can access everything from a mobile phone, which means it sort of takes away the need for connecting with people. Because fundamentally in the past, if you had to go out into the world to do things, because now people work from home remotely, if you had to go out in the world to actively do things, you would have a need to connect with people. But now, if everything can be brought to you to your doorstep, there is lesser and lesser reason, fewer and fewer reasons to be interested in going out to connect with people on a physical level. So these are some of the things that I think about, and I feel like more should be done to explain or to express that life is harder, or the baseline of life is suffering. However, suffering in itself is meaningful. It is the suffering that gives life meaning. If you write an exam 5 times and you pass it the 6th time, it makes the journey so much more beautiful, right? And then, but this understanding in itself sometimes is lacking, and then this takes away from the entire concept. So this is pretty much why I think it's something that is worthy of discussion, and then we don't discuss it enough or as much as we should. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like I said, it's an existential conversation. It's something that keeps me up at night. Sometimes I even ponder about, well, what happens after, right? And I'm quite spiritual, but I would say I like to ask these questions because obviously I believe that we were given our brains for a reason, right? We were given the power to have dominion over knowledge, to seek knowledge, to contribute to the world by making sense of the happenings in the world, making sense of the happenings internally, the discussions we have with ourselves. So these are the things that I would say make me go back and forth. So I'd like to, this is a conversation that I would love to have over and over and over again on deeper levels. I think it makes more sense when this conversation is had with people. It makes a lot more sense. Yeah. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Cheers.